Few dare to ask whether the creation story we know is truly the first version ever told to humanity. Before Genesis was recorded as the beginning of everything, there were other accounts, some fragmented, others completely erased from collective memory. Among them, a mysterious manuscript older than any biblical book may have revealed details about a forgotten world, a time when creation followed rules we can no longer comprehend. The so-called pre-Genesis Testament emerges as one of the most controversial revelations of recent times. It is said to be an ancient writing, older than the book of Genesis, describing the first creation and events that never reached us. Fragmented references in apocryphal texts and ancient traditions suggest that a different version of history once existed, one that was deliberately erased to give way to the narrative we know today. Throughout the centuries, religious councils decided which books would become part of the Bible. Many texts were left out, some for political reasons, others for not aligning with the desired doctrine. The idea of an earlier Genesis might sound absurd to many, but several archaeological discoveries indicate that alternative records of creation circulated long before the current version. Could this have been the original text from which everything began? Most intriguing of all is that this manuscript would not only present different details of creation, but also reveal events that could completely change our understanding of humanity's origins. This possibility raises the question, what was removed and why? That is exactly what makes the pre-Genesis Testament so controversial, because it could expose truths that official history tried to bury forever. Before we continue, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden mysteries of the Bible, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who seek the truth. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We love hearing from you. And if you want to support this mission even more, become a member by clicking the Join button below. Your support helps us keep bringing these powerful revelations to light. If such a manuscript truly existed, it would challenge the very foundations of what billions of people believe about the beginning of the world. Ancient civilizations outside of Israel, like the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Egyptians, left behind writings that describe acts of creation far older than the Book of Genesis. Some of these accounts even mention beings of light, celestial councils, and multiple stages of creation that never appear in our Bible. Could fragments of these stories be echoes of the pre-Genesis Testament? References to hidden books are not uncommon in Scripture itself. The Bible mentions texts like the Book of Jasher and the Book of the Wars of the Lord, which are now lost. These clues show that the version of Genesis we have today may not be the full story, but a carefully selected one. What else could have been deliberately excluded, especially if it revealed a side of creation that ancient religious authorities did not want preserved? Over time, the control of sacred texts became as much political as it was spiritual. Early councils and powerful leaders decided which writings were safe for believers and which ones posed a threat to the religious order. If a text described a world before Adam and Eve, it would completely alter humanity's sense of origin. Accepting such a revelation would mean admitting that Genesis as we know it is incomplete and that the truth about the first creation was intentionally buried. This idea may seem impossible to those who have always believed that Genesis was the first and only account, but history has repeatedly shown that records are rewritten, altered, or destroyed to serve specific agendas. The pre-Genesis Testament, if real, would not be just another apocryphal story. It would be a direct challenge to the official narrative of creation, exposing that the version handed down to us might be only a fragment of the original truth. Theories about this lost text suggest it may have described not just one act of creation, but multiple stages of existence. Some traditions speak of a world that thrived long before Adam, a creation that was later wiped away in an event so devastating that no trace of it remained. If such an account truly existed, it would explain why Genesis seems to start abruptly, as if another story had already ended before the one we know began. Archaeological discoveries have fueled this debate even further. Ancient tablets, inscriptions and scrolls found in the Middle East reveal myths of divine beings shaping humanity in stages, sometimes destroying earlier versions of man. These fragments parallel Genesis in intriguing ways, yet they contain details that were never included in the Bible. Could these be remnants of a broader story? A story that the pre-Genesis Testament fully recorded before it was erased? Religious institutions throughout history have often controlled which truths were allowed to survive. A text describing a creation before Adam would have been dangerous because it would undermine the uniqueness of humanity's origin. It would raise questions about God's first creation, about the purpose of that earlier world, and about why it was ultimately destroyed. Such revelations could have shaken the entire theological structure that leaders wanted to preserve. If this lost testament revealed a forgotten era, it might also contain knowledge about beings that existed long before mankind. Celestial entities, guardians of creation, and witnesses of events erased from human memory. It may have spoken of a reality far more complex than the simple narrative of Genesis. This possibility makes the pre-Genesis Testament one of the most feared and controversial ideas in biblical history. Throughout the centuries, hints of alternative creation stories have surfaced in both Jewish and early Christian writings. Some rabbis debated whether other worlds could have existed before Adam, while certain early church fathers speculated about a creation before creation. These ideas were later suppressed, labeled as heretical, and erased from mainstream teachings. Yet their existence suggests that the notion of a pre-Genesis testament may not be as far-fetched as it first appears. The absence of this manuscript in the biblical canon raises an uncomfortable question. Was it lost by chance or deliberately hidden? History has shown that powerful religious authorities often decided which writings would shape faith and which would vanish. A text describing God's first creation, different from what we read in Genesis, would have been seen as a direct threat to the established order, especially if it contradicted doctrines that gave authority to those leaders. The very structure of Genesis hints at something missing. It begins with a sudden "in the beginning," yet provides no context about what came before. Scholars have long noted the unusual gaps and abrupt transitions in the text, as if parts of a larger story had been removed. Could these gaps be the result of an intentional effort to erase any mention of God's earlier creation? If such a text were to be found today, it would not only shock religious institutions, but also rewrite human history as we know it. The pre-Genesis Testament could reveal truths about the origin of existence, the nature of God's first creation, and why that creation was never meant to survive. And it is precisely this potential for disruption that makes the idea of this manuscript so dangerous to those who uphold the official narrative. Speculation about the pre-Genesis Testament often points to fragments hidden within apocryphal and pseudepigraphal writings. Some of these texts, discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, hint at stories of creation that differ from the Genesis we know. They mention divine councils, multiple attempts at forming humanity, and even catastrophic events that erased earlier worlds. If these pieces truly come from a more complete account, they may represent the last echoes of a story that powerful men wanted forgotten. Theologians who have studied these fragments believe that such a record would not simply add details to Genesis, but change its meaning entirely. If there were other creations before Adam, then humanity is not the first and only pinnacle of God's plan. It would imply that history is cyclical, that worlds have risen and fallen long before ours, and that what we call the beginning is only the latest chapter of a much older story. This possibility would raise profound questions about God's relationship with creation. Why would earlier worlds be erased? Did they fail in some divine test? Was humanity chosen because of a greater plan, or as a last attempt after previous creations were destroyed? Such revelations would shatter centuries of theological teaching and force believers to rethink everything they have been told about the Garden of Eden and the origins of mankind. For centuries, religious institutions have guarded their authority by controlling sacred texts. A document proving that Genesis is incomplete would be the ultimate threat to that control. It would expose how human hands shaped what became the official Bible and reveal that we have inherited only part of the truth. The pre-Genesis Testament, if ever uncovered, could ignite one of the greatest crises of faith in history. Ancient traditions outside the Bible may also provide indirect evidence of this lost record. Civilizations such as the Mesopotamians, Egyptians, and even early Greeks preserved myths about cycles of creation and destruction, in which gods formed and erased worlds repeatedly. These accounts, though considered myths today, bear striking similarities to the idea of a creation that predates Adam. Could these be distorted memories of the same original story once written in the pre-Genesis Testament? If such a manuscript had survived intact, it might have described beings that existed long before mankind, entities of light, guardians of creation, and witnesses of events erased from our scriptures. It could have explained why God chose to begin anew with Adam and Eve, placing them in a carefully prepared world after the destruction of what came before. This knowledge would fundamentally change our understanding of Genesis and humanity's place in the divine plan. The very act of hiding or erasing such a text suggests it contained knowledge too dangerous for the religious authorities of its time. By controlling which narratives became canon, they ensured that only one version of creation endured. A revelation describing God's first creation, its failure and its destruction, would undermine centuries of doctrine and expose that the official Genesis is not the entire story. For believers who have always trusted the established account, such a discovery would be earth-shattering. It would confirm that history has been filtered, edited, and shaped by human agendas. The pre-Genesis Testament would not simply be another ancient book, it would be the missing link that redefines everything we know about the beginning, about God, and about humanity's true origin. Some scholars argue that the clues to this lost creation are hidden within the Bible itself. Verses that reference the foundations of the world or the deep before creation hint at events that predate Genesis 1:1. Even the mysterious phrase, "the earth was without form and void," may suggest that something already existed before God reshaped it. These subtle details could be remnants of a greater narrative, one that was once fully written in the pre-Genesis Testament. Over the centuries, fragments of alternative traditions persisted in oral stories and mystical writings. Certain early Jewish sects and Christian groups believed in multiple worlds before Adam, teaching that humanity was not the first creation, but the latest attempt at fulfilling a divine purpose. These teachings were eventually suppressed, their texts banned, and their followers silenced, leaving behind only scattered references to what may have been an older, more complete story. The erasure of this knowledge was not accidental. Controlling which books were preserved gave religious authorities immense power over what people believed about God and creation. By presenting Genesis as the ultimate beginning, they solidified a single, unquestionable narrative. But if the pre-Genesis Testament were revealed today, it would prove that the story of humanity began far earlier than anyone has been taught, and that our world is part of a much larger plan. Such a revelation would force theologians, historians, and believers alike to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our understanding of the Bible has been shaped by centuries of selection, omission, and manipulation. The discovery of the pre-Genesis Testament would not only add a new chapter to history, it would overturn the very foundation of how we view God's creation and humanity's role within it. The possibility of such a text being found today terrifies many religious authorities. It would mean admitting that the official narrative of Genesis is incomplete and that the true history of creation was deliberately altered. Entire doctrines, traditions, and teachings would have to be re-examined in light of a far older account, one that might reveal aspects of God's nature and purpose that humanity was never meant to forget. If the pre-Genesis Testament truly exists, it could explain mysteries that scholars have debated for centuries. Why does Genesis begin so abruptly? Why are there hints of prior events and beings who existed before Adam and Eve? Why do ancient cultures share similar stories of creation and destruction? The answers to these questions might all lie in a record that was erased long before our version of the Bible was finalized. Imagine the implications if such a manuscript were discovered. It would become the most important archaeological and theological find in history, challenging the foundations of every major belief system. This revelation would not just rewrite the story of Genesis, it would reshape how we understand God's relationship with humanity, creation, and the divine plan that spans far beyond what we know. For many, the thought of an earlier creation raises fear, while for others it sparks hope, a chance to finally know the whole truth. Perhaps this is why the idea of a pre-Genesis testament has endured through whispers, legends, and hidden fragments. It represents the possibility that what we've been told is only part of the story, and that the real beginning of everything has been waiting to be revealed. Throughout history, whenever new discoveries threatened the established order, they were either suppressed or reinterpreted to fit existing doctrine. If the pre-Genesis Testament surfaced today, the same forces of resistance would emerge. Institutions that have built their authority on the current version of Genesis would fight to discredit or hide it, fearing the chaos that such a revelation could unleash among believers worldwide. The text might reveal that humanity was not God's first attempt at creation. It could describe worlds and beings that existed long before Adam, offering details about why those earlier creations were erased. Such knowledge would deeply challenge traditional theology, forcing people to confront the idea that Genesis is only a fragment of a far older and more complex story about God and his purposes. Even the existence of other beings before man would shift the way we understand our place in creation. It would raise questions about free will, divine justice, and whether history has been repeating cycles of creation and judgment since time immemorial. The pre-Genesis Testament might also uncover why Adam and Eve were chosen specifically for the new world, and what role humanity plays in a larger plan that stretches far beyond Genesis. For believers, this discovery would not necessarily weaken faith, but could expand it. It would mean that God's works are far greater and older than we ever imagined. Understanding that there were other creations before us could lead to a deeper awe of the divine plan, showing that humanity's story is just one part of a vast history of God's interaction with creation. The final pages of the pre-Genesis Testament, if ever found, would likely contain the most shocking revelation of all: that before Adam and Eve, there was an entire creation, complete with beings of great power and knowledge, that ultimately fell into corruption. This earlier world was judged and destroyed, leaving only fragments of its memory scattered in myths and forbidden texts. Genesis, as we know it, begins after this cataclysm, presenting only the restart of God's plan, not its true beginning. Such a revelation would prove that what we consider the beginning is, in fact, a second chapter of a much older history. The text might describe how God reshaped the earth from the ruins of the first world, preparing a new creation where Adam and Eve would become central to a renewed divine purpose. This would explain the abruptness of Genesis 1:1, why the Bible starts as though something had already happened. If uncovered, this manuscript would confirm that humanity has inherited only a portion of the truth. The story we know was shaped by human hands, edited to serve religious and political agendas over centuries. The pre-Genesis Testament would not simply challenge doctrine. It would expose that the earliest and most profound truths about creation were hidden to maintain control over belief. For those willing to see beyond the accepted narrative, such a discovery would forever change our understanding of God, creation, and the purpose of existence itself. The pre-Genesis Testament would stand as undeniable proof that the history of humanity is far older, far deeper, and far more mysterious than what Genesis alone has told us for millennia. What do you think about this revelation? Could it be that humanity has only been told half the story of creation? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We love to know where in the world you are watching from. And if this video made you reflect on the hidden truths of Scripture, like it, share it, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. You can also bless this channel by becoming a member. Just click the join button below and help us keep unveiling the deepest mysteries of the Bible.